We're back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sponsored Content. I'm your host. Today on episode 13 of Spawn Storytime, we will actually be pivoting to discuss a bit of the Youngblood backstory. In light of our revelation that the asshole Chapel, he is the person responsible for blasting Al Simmons in the face and sending him to hell to be reborn again as Spawn. So today we're actually going to take not a long time. Our last episode went a bit long due to the reveal and some other factors, but in this episode we're going to kind of briefly explore who the Youngblood team is and who Chapel is specifically, and just a little bit of his backstory, because with Chapel being Al Simmons' killer, I feel like that's kind of an important story element to explore just a bit further and just outside of the Spawn mainline comic. So we're going to pop over real quickly to Youngblood number 1. Take a look at this cover. This episode will be a little bit more haphazard because I just don't have quite as much knowledge of the Youngblood series. Basically, when I discovered that Chapel was responsible for killing Al Simmons, I had to decide whether or not I wanted, to pursue, Youngblood backstory and all this. If you're like me and you don't really know anything, hopefully this will provide a basic understanding of who the Youngbloods are and who Chapel is. Particularly given that the Youngblood team has been mentioned several times in the last dozen issues, in various capacities. We've already gathered that there's a team of superheroes in the Spawn universe, and they are either, supported by, funded by, orchestrated by, or generally just an extension of the government, the US government. But in any case, this cover here, Youngblood number 1, cover art by Rob Liefeld. We see Chapel off to the right with his classic sort of white tattoo skull face. We also notice, of course, there's no feet drawn on this cover, but that's another story. The Youngblood team is basically a team of superheroes. The first group of Youngblood is Shaft, Die Hard, Bedrock, Vogue, and Chapel. And an interesting thing about Bedrock is that he encountered some legal issues with Hanna-Barbera, of course relating to the Flintstones and Bedrock there. So at a point, pretty quickly, Bedrock will turn into Badrock and remain the same character, but with just a name change, I believe. I don't really have much else to say about this particular cover. It was released on April 1st, 1992, so this was like a month before Spawn was released, so this would have come out first. I guess technically it may have been released on April 16th, 1992. But I just don't have much to say about this cover. It's kind of a basic cover to me. It's kind of a team of superheroes. That's just not really my bag, but we do see Chapel sort of emblazoned inside that Image Comics logo as well. So that's kind of neat. As far as Chapel himself, a bit of his backstory, we'll take a look here at Youngblood Strike File number 1. And here is where we get more of an introduction to Chapel and some of his backstory, specifically as it relates to him knowing Al Simmons. Chapel and Al Simmons knew each other from way back when. They were in school together. They were also ultimately both in the military, and they both became mercenaries, slash government contract assassins. I do have a Youngblood Strike File number 1, 2, and 3 in print, so I might yank those out and get a few images of the interior pages and panels to go along with this video. If I do decide to do that, that will probably happen right here. Alright, so here's Youngblood Strike File number 1. I'm going to go ahead and open this bad boy up. This is a flip cover, if you know what that is. Basically, there's 2 covers. Yeah, whatever. This is Chapel on the back here. So we'll take a look. The production quality here is going to be awful, but we at least get to see this is kind of Chapel and all his glory, sort of this crotch, right there. That's kind of his thing. But there's some cool artwork in here. I'll do a better job of doing these types of videos in the future. I just wanted to kind of show this issue a bit. I actually haven't been inside here yet, so it's actually kind of cool. This looks like Jason Wynn right here. Trying to take this in at the same time. I mean, we got Al Simmons over here, so again, I apologize for the janky ass video, but at least you guys can see we have Chapel and Al Simmons. Like I was saying, they're both kind of big, buff, badass motherfuckers. So, Youngblood Strike File number 1 was released on April 1st, 1993, depicting artwork of Die Hard, the Youngblood character, with artwork by Rob Liefeld. Issue number 3 of Youngblood Strike File is where we will get a pretty sweet picture of Chapel all beefed up on the front, looking pretty buff. In his time in the military, being a mercenary, just like Al Simmons, he was at times maybe employed directly by Jason Wynn or in some other shadow capacity. But the reason Chapel is so goddamn huge is he was taking some sort of injections that he was being given by Jason Wynn. And I think those injections have kind of created a lot of muscle mass here. And that's one of the reasons why Chapel sort of has this like disproportionately, giant sort of upper half here, looking sort of almost grotesque and like Bane or something in a way. But yeah, again, I really have no knowledge or any backstory of the Youngblood team or Chapel in particular. I'm just kind of going off some general notes here. I'll put the sources of the information that I'm using in the description of this video. But this is a pretty sweet cover, in my opinion. Again, we have Chapel on the front here looking pretty badass. So another thing that may be sort of relevant, at least we find out a little bit more in Youngblood Strike File number 2, is Chapel's kind of a horn dog. So he's really into sort of the heat of the moment and the lady of the night, sort of the flavor of the week, the one and done. But apparently in Youngblood Strike File number 2, there's a scene where Chapel's sort of engaged in a romantic situation in his bedroom or in his apartment, I guess. But it's probably a little bit important to mention here, at least, that Chapel sees himself as sort of a Casanova, and he's kind of just kind of all over the place, fornicating and murdering, and kind of being sort of like an 80s like beefed up action hero, but like a bro and sort of like a Chad. But anyway. It's also worth mentioning that in the mid-90s, following several appearances in his own series with Youngblood and cameos and supporting appearances with Spawn, that Chapel did enjoy a short run where he's featured in his own comic titled Chapel. So that's just something worth mentioning, I think, since we're kind of covering Chapel and like who he is and what he's about. So there is a separate series from Youngblood that he is the star of, if you're so inclined to pursue that further as well. So as best I can tell, Chapel is a lot like Al Simmons in a way, and being that they both sort of have a similar backstory and that they were mercenaries in the military and involved in similar work, we can surmise that at some point they were probably friends, probably used to hang out, and then at some point maybe deviated a bit from one another. They're probably a lot alike, but Chapel is a little more of a loner maybe, whereas Al had kind of, he wanted to have a family. So we can assume that maybe they're polar opposites in that regard. The Youngblood team of superheroes is a separate comic series that is also under the Image Comics umbrella. It is written and illustrated primarily by Rob Liefeld, at least at the beginning, or as far as I care about. What you need to know in order to progress, further into the Spawn story is pretty minimal with regard to Youngblood. So, they're a team of superheroes. On this team exists a person called Chapel. He's kind of a big dickhead. He's kind of, big and badass like Al Simmons was. He's the one who was responsible for shooting Al Simmons in the face, as we know. In episode 14 of Spawn Storytime, we will actually be covering Spawn issue number 13, which is a continuation of our episode number 12, in which we learned that Spawn was killed by Chapel. That's kind of a mouthful, so let me rephrase that in a better way. In our next episode of Spawn Storytime, we will continue along with the story arc titled Flashback. This will be part 2, where we continue on Spawn's journey. He has just realized who is responsible for murdering him, and now he will be on a journey to find Chapel and ultimately confront him over his betrayal, maybe, but certainly just over the fact that he blasts Al in the face. And that pretty much brings us to a close on our segue from issue number 12, in which we learned that Chapel killed Al Simmons. I thought it might be nice to just take a quick break and kind of figure out who the Youngblood team is and who Chapel is, at least insofar as it relates to our current story. So this was just a short episode to try to explain a bit of the Youngblood universe, part of the greater comic Image universe. But in this episode, we got a glimpse of who Chapel was, and hopefully I provided a bit of information that would allow you to do some further research if you were so inclined into Chapel himself, or more specifically, his incorporation into the Youngblood team. But This has been Sponsored Content with episode number 13, Focus on Chapel. When we return in episode 14, we will get back to Spawn issue number 13. In closing, this has been Sponsored Content with Spawn Storytime, episode number 13. Thanks for stopping by. Hope to see you again.